Hello, cutie. Take a seat. I think we have something to talk about. Since it's Black History Month, I thought it would be appropriate to tell you this story that I have never forgotten. In fact, I think this story ties to different points in my life because it ties to the very essence of what I can't get away from, which is my blackness, my brownness, my all that I am, right? And this story takes place, picture it, Memphis, Tennessee, in the early 2000s. No, late 1900s, honey. That's what it was because I was about 6. And my mom and dad, we needed a new car. So we drove out to the middle of nowhere, is what it felt like. But honestly, everything feels like the middle of nowhere when you live in Tennessee because everything is the middle of nowhere, right? We drive out to the middle of nowhere to this car show place where you get used cars and stuff. I don't know. It's not my vibe. And I remember my parents were sitting in another room where the auction was occurring. And what I remember most is all the mechanical sounds, the bright lights, the like gray slate colors of everything. Everything just seemed to be gray. And then there was a room that was like the family room. They had outing tables, the tables with the large table in the middle with the benches connected. And there were a few different families sitting there. So my parents told us, go sit in the other room, relax, you know? That's not really what they said. They said, get your hind parts in the other room and don't bother me. That's probably more like what they said. So we went and sat. And I remember at a certain point I had to go to the bathroom, went to the bathroom, this gross little dingy little hole of whatever it was. And I come back, and as I'm walking to my table, I see this tuft of blonde hair sitting in front of my sister, directly in front of my sister at the table where we were both sitting. And so I walk up and I said, excuse me, I was sitting there. Why? Because my parents taught us manners. And they also taught us how to talk to our lesser melanated cousins because it was Tennessee, it was Memphis, and it was the 90s. And you would think at that time, the things that we had to do to protect ourselves would have been different. But no, honey, Tennessee is way behind, has always been behind, in my opinion. But either way, I say, excuse me, I was sitting there and he looks at me and he says, I'm not moving. And he looks at my sister and he starts calling her the N word. And I must say, though there are many N words that describe me, I'm nice. Sometimes I'm nasty and I'm very nuanced. But the word that he used was a word that I knew was a word that should not be used to describe me or my sister. But I had heard it around us, but I never connected it to us. And this was the moment that I thought, this is what my parents have been training us for. These are the things that we have to be careful of. And though they may not have said those things directly to us, the hushed conversations that they had prior to leaving, knowing that we were going into an environment that had less people that looked like us, the conversations they had around what to do, what not to do, we heard them. And so though they were not targeted at us, I felt them deeply in my heart. And I knew at that moment that I was in danger, that my sister was in danger, that our reaction at 6 years old, I knew that my reaction could be the difference between the potential of our life or the potential of our death in this space. That's a very heavy weight to carry in such a small body. But I tried my best. And I remember looking at my sister and this look, she was mortified, if that's an expression you can have as a 7-year-old child. And we just got up and we went and sat by our parents. We did not tell them what happened. You know why we didn't tell them what happened? Because I think it was like we Bluetooth synced to each other that if we said anything, there was a potential for something worse. So we said nothing. We sat through the rest of that auction as if everything was normal. I remember the ride home. I remember leaning my head against the window and looking out and seeing all the stars. And it was just different shades of blackness around us, different tones of darkness. The darkness of the trees was a different darkness of the sky, was a different darkness of the road, but everything was darkness, with the exception of those few speckled stars in the sky. And I never forgot that. And I don't think I ever told my parents about it. But about a decade ago, I was teaching. And I was teaching. Oh, I'm a little thirsty. I have to pace myself. And I was teaching in an area where most of the people did not look like me. And I had a few experiences, but this one experience really affected me. I'll never forget, I was teaching sixth grade science. I was covering a class, and I had all the papers set to pass out, and I went to pass out the papers. And this one child would not take the paper from me. He looked repulsed and disgusted that I was even near him. And when I walked away, I remember he said, "There goes that black B word, you know. I'm so tired of her." And I continued to walk to my desk as if I heard nothing. Because in that moment, I think it was the first time that I deeply connected that racism and all the isms are taught. They're not inherent. This was a child. This baby did not come out the womb thinking that way. He was trained that way because here I was around all of these different children, and most of them did not look like me, and many of them loved me, and some of them didn't love me, and some of them hated me, and hated me for nothing other than the fact that I did not look like them. And that settled in my heart in a way that, you know how you let the bookshelf just sit and you forget to dust it and it gets that thick layer of dust? I think that settled a thick layer of dust around my heart. But not necessarily in a bad way, because in that moment I was able to see it for what it was, and not for just how it affected me, but also how it affected him, how it affects other people. And I think we need more of that empathy. I'm not saying take everything, let people treat you any kind of way, but I am saying that understanding, having understanding for others, can help you navigate this crazy world that we live in. And it's our responsibility when we become adults to undo the hatred that has been trained into us, to undo the bias that has been trained into us, and to pour kindness and love into ourselves and those around us. Now, the way that that story ended with this child, I thought was very interesting. Because, at least now looking back on what I did, every time I had a class with this child, I changed the way that I would teach. Instead of passing out the papers, I would set multiple stacks on my desk, and I would assign a student to pick up the stacks. And I always assigned that student to pick up the stacks of paper for his group. And that allowed him very small interactions with me until what initially felt like hatred turned into a measure of toleration. It was progress. Anywho, sunshine. Here's to loving yourself, loving others, and finding room for kindness. See you, cutie.